Oppenheimer is a good film which aspires to be great, yet is incapable of figuring out what greatness looks like. Its reach exceeds its grasp, and I'd say this applies to most of Christopher Nolan's work. I want to get that out of the way now because I do have compliments which will come. If you've seen Raging Bull, JFK, and The Social Network, then you've seen everything Oppenheimer has to offer. So, while Nolan is a very capable director who does a good job, you'll be saddled with the sense that this is just a rehash of ideas others have executed brilliantly, but with a focus on a highly unlikable man in Robert Oppenheimer. By the end of the film, it was clear that he deserved everything he got. He cucks a friend, betrays his wife, and walks about with little humor and even less zest for life. He's portrayed as a soulless schizo even during his purported rakish youth. They say he is a womanizer, but we aren't shown even one moment which establishes his charm or wit. Surely a successful womanizer would have these traits, right? Regardless, if karma is real, then he absolutely received the appropriate backlash. His eldest son lived a quiet, perhaps reclusive life on a farm, and his daughter committed suicide in her 30s. Compare that outcome to Heisenberg's children, who successfully reproduced and continued to produce exceptional work to this day. Did the good guys really win?
I don't know.
This outcome is unsurprising given how little he or his wife Kitty seem to care for their children, but I digress. The detonation of the nuke is uninspiring, thanks largely due to the marketing department. They blew their load and gave us the goods before the film even opened, just like with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. And so the jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring visuals that you'd be expecting are exactly what you've already seen.
Not a great plan.
Cillian Murphy delivers a beautiful performance. He's a marvelous actor, but it's undone by the editing. We see Oppenheimer as an ambitious youth and a despondent man right next to each other. So that sense of change over time, which could have been achieved with a standard structure, is broken up front. This, of course, ruins the sense of character progression and development. Worse still, due to Oppenheimer's characterization in the film, he doesn't have anything available to really display nuance. Subtle acting is crucial to a good drama, yes, but the performance is the same at the start as at the end, thanks to a mediocre script and a confused edit. We could have seen a new side to Opie thanks to his relationship with Tatlock, with his marriage, after he loses his security clearance, or once his children grow up and he's older and wiser. But we don't get anything like that. We just get the same starey face and monotone. This is frustrating because lesser characters have more nuance than the lead. I must especially acknowledge Robert Downey Jr., Emily Blunt, Benny Safdie, Casey Affleck, and Josh Hartnett. They steal every scene they're in, which is quite limited as this is Oppenheimer's show, but were nevertheless phenomenal roles for any actor to nab. The film currently stands at an 8.8 out of 10 on IMDb, and I think this speaks to the stupidity of the masses.
What are you talking about? What?
This is a masterpiece to those who have seen fewer than 100 films, or Paul Schrader, who likes to tell porcupines about issues he's passionate about because he's a religious zealot masquerading as a rational adult. Final criticism: the film is not a character study, nor does it have a gripping plot. It's one long exposition dump carried on the shoulders of a stellar soundtrack. You can count the scenes which are actually written like a screenplay, rather than like an advertisement for the life and times of J. Robert Oppenheimer. The number of characters who call Opie brilliant, important, or even a prophet reminded me of this cringe-inducing moment from the Avengers.
I like this one.
And it becomes very aggravating when Opie's inability to be a good husband and father is brushed off as, well, because you feel guilt for your behavior, it means, like, you're not a piece of shit? Never mind that this makes no sense. Nolan has never been capable of delivering on show don't tell, but it is a particularly egregious failure in Oppenheimer. Yes, exposition is necessary because it's a biopic about a less discussed moment in history, but Jesus Christ, Nolan, mate, if your audience is so stupid that they need all this expo, or your ambition's so great that you can't realistically achieve it without spoon-feeding every detail, then consider a pivot before you start production. Christopher Nolan has made it clear that he prefers to create audio-visual experiences which are less about plot and character. So I think that what he means by this is he prefers something akin to pure cinema. Now, I very much enjoy pure cinema myself and think more movies should adopt it, but the issue with this is that he isn't making a film like Bereka or Soy Cuba, he's making a biopic about Oppenheimer, the requirements for which ought to dictate well above average characterization rather than an emphasis on shallow characters and enticing images. I think if this script had been moulded by Nolan after having been completed by a more competent writer, then you could have avoided these issues. Oppenheimer wasn't for me, and I'm quite disappointed as I'd hoped a Nolan biopic would force him to create a genuine character amidst the audiovisual spectacle he so loves. There are plenty of little details he could have inserted into the picture which would provide glimpses into the nuances of the great man. For instance, Opie was big into mysticism, and yes, we all know about the I am death quote, but a little scene with Niels Bohr, who shared his interest, discussing the deeper meaning of the Hindu text would be interesting. Give us something personal instead of the sanctioned image of the man. Or perhaps you could have included the fact that Oppenheimer found psychoanalysis far more stimulating than physics. We get one reference to this, delivered as a statement rather than in conversation, when Opie and Tatlock first sleep together. He knows about Freud and Jung, but why not incorporate that into a discussion about man building a weapon that harnesses the power of God? What is inside of us which desires to uncover this power to destroy ourselves and then go and utilize it? I'm sure the astute mind of the real Oppenheimer had a few opinions on that. I mention this because Opie is the least interesting part of this film, and while Cillian's great abilities are used appropriately, it is not to the extent that they could have been. It was just what needed to be done and nothing special was added. Now, I'm not going to hit you with a plot summary as you've probably gone on Wikipedia already and read the cliff notes of his life, which is essentially what's covered in the film. So with all of that out of the way, I will say that I enjoyed the movie and would recommend you go see it in the theatre. It is an above average film in comparison to modern schlock, and Nolan has achieved gorgeous visuals, which is typical of all his previous films. Nice pictures, great music, good performances, you've got it all here, and that does make for an experience. The direction is precise, and while I do think the editing is sloppy, each individual scene is well made. And so it does ensure you can follow everything without any issue. There's never really a moment where I felt suspense or outrage or intrigue, but I can't deny that I was in a packed cinema and other moviegoers responded viscerally to Oppenheimer's betrayal and the tension of releasing the nuke. One scene which truly sat with me as an example of Nolan's ability to grasp brilliance, even if the entire production was only good enough, involves Oppenheimer delivering a rousing speech to members of Los Alamos after the nukes have been dropped. The entire experience is only a few minutes long, but perfectly encapsulates his growing unease and fractured perception of events. We watch as people cheer on the deaths of thousands and the destruction of a nation like rabid, ignorant beasts devolving into drunkenness and lust. And yet, the horrifying reality, portrayed as a young white girl with a melting face, is that were this to happen to us, we would be overwhelmingly broken. It's this lack of empathy which drives so much zealotry amongst the warmongers. So, even if I think Oppenheimer is not brilliant, it did resonate with most other audience members, which suggests to me that it achieved what it set out to do, and for that it's worthwhile. The sound design was spot on, I imagine in response to backlash directed at Tenet, and we can very comfortably glide into a booming sonic landscape and then out into quieter dialogue scenes, all without ever hearing the gears crunch and thinking, mate, that didn't work. We also get to see Florence Pugh naked. Now, I suppose that works in its favor, though I don't think she's attractive. No matter what, you can always guarantee that eventually, every young starlet will get her kid off for art. It's one of those unspoken rules in Hollywood that you can't really advance without first showing flesh. Seth MacFarlane addressed this at the Oscars.
Naomi Watson, Mulholland Drive. Angelina Jolie, we saw your boobs in Gia. They made us feel excited and alive. Anne Hathaway, we saw your boobs in Brokeback Mountain. Halle Berry, we saw them in Monsters Ball. Nicole Kidman and Eyes Wide Shut. Marissa Tomei and The Wrestler, but we haven't seen Jennifer Lawrence's boobs at all. We saw your boobs.
I walked out of the theatre deep in thought, and so to its credit, Oppenheimer did make me think. but all my thoughts veered towards disappointment and criticism. So I'll end by saying if you liked this movie, then that's all well and good. I'm glad you got something out of it. But I don't think Oppenheimer should be considered anything at all like a masterpiece. If exposition and a great score make a movie special, then any idiot could do it. The other thing which came to mind as I walked back home was that Spike Lee's Malcolm X provided subjective and objective views on a major historical figure with far more intelligence and nuance and heart about the human condition than Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. So, if you haven't already, then I highly recommend you go watch Malcolm X. Thanks so much for listening.
6, 5, 4, 3,
Truman needs to know what's next.
2,
What's next?